Not long after I started my second year of uni, I met a lad named Andy Stalker. And there was something of a pattern to mine and Stalker's friendship, one which invariably involved him getting me out of trouble. Like the time he got me a job at the bar he was a supervisor at and I somehow lost my shoes. And I had to call him to say something like, "Mate, I can't come to work, I've lost my shoes." And then when I assured him that it wasn't an excuse, he loaned me some money for a taxi into town so I could buy a new pair. And that was just one of the many times he pulled my butt out of the fire, and by the time we graduated, I'd have done pretty much anything for Stalker. But little did I know that I'd do anything for him promise was going to be put to the test in the most rigorous way possible. After graduation, me and Stalker ended up moving in together. And then about a year later, he announced that he was going to be traveling around Thailand for 6 months. Now I was gutted that he was leaving, but I was actually made up that he was doing something so cool. And then it was bear hugs all around when the day of his departure came. Now after that, we kept in touch, which was how I found out that he was staying in Thailand for another 6 months. But then a month or two after that, he stopped replying to my emails. I didn't think anything of it at first, but when 1 week without hearing from him turned into 3, I sent him a message asking if he was alright and how the trip was going. About a week later, he replied saying that everything was fine and he was in the very far north of Thailand visiting a sort of commune. He explained that there was a village out there in the middle of nowhere where tourists could sort of live wild for a while before going back to civilization. He'd been up to all kinds of crazy stuff out there. He'd learned how to drive, how to perform traditional Thai tattoos. He went to all these Buddhist temples to undergo mini monk training too. So I thought the commune thing was just another one of his little adventures. Now that message was the last I heard from Stalker via email. When a full 2 months elapsed and I still hadn't heard from him again, I started to worry that he'd sort of moved on or something, and had found new friends among the people he was traveling with. And it hurt thinking that he didn't care enough to make time to email me, but I wasn't his owner, so those sorts of thoughts made me feel guilty enough to shove all my worries down and ignore them. But then maybe a week or so after a 2-month period of silence had elapsed, I got a call from Stalker's mom, and she did not sound happy. I thought Stalker would be keeping in touch with his mom as a matter of priority, so to hear that he hadn't only cemented my concern. When I told her that I hadn't heard from him either, she told me that she was going to contact the police over in Thailand to report him missing. I asked her to keep me updated, but when she did, it wasn't good news. The Thai police tracked Stalker down to some small jungle commune up near the border of Myanmar. He insisted he was fine and was there by his own free will, so the Thai police couldn't exactly drag him back to Bangkok since his visa was still valid. But when they asked him to get in touch with his family because they were worried about him, Stalker did no such thing. The police also said Stalker was looking very unwell when they found him, and from the way he spoke to them, they suspected that he was either heavily abusing drugs or was suffering some kind of mental health crisis. And we were devastated. Something was going on over there and Stalker was suffering. I had no idea what to do about it, but it turned out Stalker's mom had a plan. Stalker's dad passed away some years ago, and then since his sister was disabled and his mom had health problems, they were in no position to fly out to Thailand. But I was. I had the means and the will, and the only thing I was lacking was the funding. But Stalker's mom, Sue, said that she and his sister were willing to finance the entire trip. And it was surreal in the extreme, I'll be honest. Not just because of what was being asked of me, but because I thought if anything, Stalker would be the one having to rescue me from something like that. But I'd never have refused the request in a million years. So after sorting the time off with work, I flew off to Thailand to bring Stalker home. And after the 17-hour flight, I was absolutely exhausted, and that first 24 hours was spent catching up on rest and adjusting to the time zone. But then, once I was up and about again, Sue Stalker, aka Andy's mom, sent over an email detailing where I had to go and what I had to do. That 17-hour flight turned out to be just the first leg of my journey, because the next phase included a 14-hour bus ride from Bangkok to a small town in the far north called Nai Soi. That bus ride made the flight seem easy in comparison, and it was made even worse by the fact that I got extremely travel sick on some of the bumpier roads. It was in Nai Soi that I met up with a local guide named Prem. Prem had heard of the remote jungle village where the Western tourists, quote-unquote, went native, and Stalker's mom had arranged for him to guide me, just not all the way there. Prem told me that the area that I wanted to get to was full of, quote, bad people. There were smugglers, bandits, armed rebels, and gun-toting poppy farmers guarding their fields. It was completely lawless out there. But that's why Stalker's commune chose to base themselves there, so they could do whatever they wanted, whenever they wanted to. And while that might sound like a good thing on the surface, Prem assured me otherwise. He said the only reports he'd heard of this commune was that it was a village full of crazy Farang, which is the Thai word for foreigners. He said the village's name used to be Wat Khao Tong, and that many Thai used to live there. But then as more of the crazy Farang moved in, the more the Thai people began to move out. And then after maybe 10 years or so, there were only a handful of Thai people living there, acting as go-betweens for the Farang who called the village Peace Town. And I suggested to Prem that if a bunch of hippies could manage to live out there, then surely we'd be okay too. But Prem told me that that was not the case. Not only did Peace Town pay a hefty protection fee to the local smugglers, you couldn't just walk up and ask to live there. You had to be recruited in places like Bangkok or Phuket, and they only recruited people who'd be fanatically dedicated to their cause. That didn't sound like Stalker at all. The only thing that I'd ever known him to be fanatically dedicated to was his beloved football club, Huddersfield Town. But we knew he was there, so there was no chance in hell that I was about to back out, especially not having come so far. Now, Prem said the walk to Peace Town would take 2 days, and this meant an overnight stay in a small village called Wat Kareni. The only catch was that it was in the hands of Burmese rebels. And it was alarming seeing so many people walking around with guns, especially when they looked to be no older than teenagers. But the 9-hour hike through the jungle was so grueling that I was too exhausted to care for the most part. All I wanted was food and a place to lie down, and the village had both. And then after dinner, myself and Prem were shown to the place that would be staying for the night. We were both shattered and wanting nothing but sleep, but at about 9 o'clock at night, a young man with a gun stuck his head into the shack and said something to Prem in Burmese. Prem said that we had to go to the center of the village because every evening the rebel commander gave a speech and everyone, guests included, had to be there. And we made our way through the village until we came to a clearing among the houses. And there must have been 100 people there, all gathered in a semicircle around 2 men, and everyone who noticed me just sort of stopped and stared. The crowd was a mix of villagers and Burmese rebels, who you could recognize by the random bits of camouflage gear that they wore and the weapons on their shoulders. The 2 guys at the front were also Burmese rebels, but only one was on his feet, while the other was on his knees with his hands tied behind his back. I asked Prem what was happening, but he said he didn't know, and I was just hoping Prem might be able to reassure me that the guy on his knees was not about to die, but Prem couldn't do that. Not because he didn't speak Burmese, but because that's exactly what was about to happen. The man on his feet gave this big speech about how the guy was a traitor. Then, at the end, he held up the gun while all these volunteers jumped up. He gave the gun to one of them. Then the volunteer stepped forward and absolutely lit the kneeling man up with the handgun. Then there was just this big cheer. But me and Prem were completely shell-shocked, just standing there quietly while people ran over and started kicking and stamping on the dead man's body. And only then it was safe for us to walk back to our shack to try and get some sleep. But as you can imagine, sleep did not come easy anymore. I just remember lying there on that cot, listening to someone shooting off a gun in celebration, and Prem just said quietly, "We should have not come here, Owen." And he was right. I was absolutely terrified, but what was just as true was that I had to be there. I had no choice but to keep going, and walking away would have been the easiest thing in the world, but to me, there was more of a chance of a pig flying over us in the jungle. And so we stayed in our cots, managed to get a few hours of sleep, and then we were up at the crack of dawn the next morning and on the move again. And I feel like I've glossed over this by this point, but walking through the jungle was a very, very stressful experience. It was scary sometimes because there were actual tigers patrolling the same jungles as us, but most of the time it was this mix of totally exhausting because of the heat and humidity, and totally disorienting because everything looked the same to me. Prem walked for a few hours with me, and then when we got to a small stream running through the jungle, he stopped and said that that was the furthest he'd go. I asked him to come with me, stopped just shy of begging actually, but as much as he said that he was sorry, he couldn't. And then the way he wished me luck, with a sort of sad expression on his face, it had me thinking, I'm definitely going to die out here, aren't I? I was absolutely cacking myself, but Prem said that as long as I stuck to the stream, I'd make it to Peacetown by sundown. He just had 2 warnings. Firstly, if I see a tiger, do not run straight away. Throw your pack at it if it charges, then try running away. Secondly, he told me that there was a village ahead and the only one that I'd see before reaching Peacetown, and I was not to stop in it. And I only really understood why when I was there. Prem said it was a bad place, popular with bandits, and if I stopped, someone would scam me, and if I didn't move fast enough, the bandits would chase and rob me and hurt me. But it wasn't armed men that I spotted on the approach. It was just a bunch of kids playing by a stream. They were naturally a bit curious about the big Farang walking towards their village, so they walked downstream to me to have themselves a little gander. And one of them had what looked like a can of paint in their hand, and they were drinking something out of it. They were by the stream, so I assumed it was water, but when the little girl got close, I could smell the fumes coming off of what she was drinking. And I was so shocked that I asked her in English, "What the bloody hell is that you're drinking there?" Obviously, she didn't understand what I was saying, but even if she spoke English, I'm not sure that she'd have understood because she was absolutely plastered. The little drunk girl just laughed at me when I spoke, and her little friends joined in too. And I don't know if they were drunk too, but they followed me all the way through the village and only stopped shadowing me once the grown-ups pushed them out of the way. Now, I was offered everything you could imagine walking through that village. Drugs, women, guns, a wife. You name it, and those Thai villagers offered it. And once I made it through the village, I didn't know which to be more scared of. The tigers, the bandits. But when a few hours came and went and I didn't see any armed men appearing from the trees, I reckoned that I was over the worst of it. But I was dead wrong. It was almost sunset by the time I spotted another group of buildings further upstream, and I wasn't even within 50 meters by the time these 2 blokes ran out to meet me. They were white guys, very tanned with sandy blonde hair, and they were carrying primitive-looking spears. And when they were close, they pointed them at me, and then one of them asked me in a sort of Australian accent, "Looks like you're a little lost, mate. Best turn around before you get yourself hurt." And I was so tired that I could barely get the words out, but I managed to make it clear that I was looking for a lad named Andy, who might possibly be going by Stalker. Now, the other bloke, who sounded German or Austrian or something, said that there weren't any Andys living there, and then demanded to know who I was. Now, after making it clear that I was a friend of his, and if Stalker really wasn't there, then I just wanted to know where he'd gone, the 2 blokes started to soften up a bit. They stopped pointing their spears at me, and then after telling me to wait there, where I was, one of them ran back into the village. He came back a few minutes later and nodded to his mate, who then led me into the village. And I don't know if many of you remember that Chaz thing that happened in Seattle in 2020, but seeing it on the news reminded me a lot of Peacetown. All the other small towns and villages I'd seen, with the exception of one, had been neat and tidy and orderly. But this one had graffiti all over the houses. Everything was overgrown, and it was chaos. There were drum circles, people were dancing in the nude, and the smells of weed and patchouli hit you like these 1-2 punches. And there were people with guns too, spaced among the groups, wearing shades and looking very sinister. One of the spear-carrying Aussies had led me to a small concrete house, and then just said, "In there, mate. Have a good one," and then walked off. I walked inside, saw the skinny, hairy bloke looking up at me from a table, and it took about 10 seconds to realize the Charlie Manson look-alike in front of me was Stalker. And I say, "Andy?" And then, almost like it took him a second to recognize me too, his eyes suddenly lit up and shouted, "Owen!" He acted like his usual old self, and after a big hug, he asked me what I was doing in Thailand. And I told him that I was there to bring him home. And he didn't even react badly. He just sort of asked me, "Really? Why?" In this very calm but confused way, and that's when things started to go downhill. I told him to take a look at himself in the mirror and to see how skinny he'd gotten and how mental he looked with his long hair and his beard. But Stalker took this as an insult and started asking what my problem was, at which point I just completely lost my rag. I told him that my problem was that he'd scared his mom and sister so much that they'd literally paid me to bring him home, or at least try. And I also had a big problem with him acting like nothing was going on, like he hadn't done a complete 180 and started living like a hippie in one of the most dangerous places on Earth, too. Well, a lot of shouting followed after that, to the point that someone came in looking like they were ready to batter me in Stalker's defense. We cooled down a bit after that, and with Stalker saying that he'd arranged a bed for me so I'd at least have somewhere to sleep. And after that, while we were carrying a mattress into his little stone shack, Stalker apologized, but only for acting all aloof and pretending like he hadn't dropped out of life, because that's exactly what he intended on doing. He said it wasn't until he got to Thailand that he realized how much he hated his life back home. And then he went off on about how he hated the whole corrupt system back home and how he refused to be a wage slave until he died. And what he said made a lot of sense in parts. Life isn't fair. But his solution was to just give up on it. And when I talked about how worried his family were, I could see that I was getting through to him. But when he demanded that we change the subject and talk about it more in the morning, I didn't push. When I talked about how worried his family were, I could see that I was getting through to him. But when he demanded that we change the subject and talk about it in the morning, I didn't push. I knew that getting him to think about family was the way to get him home, so I didn't mind waiting to do it. And I thought that we'd end that day walking back to civilization, but in reality, it ended with me thinking that I'd never get to leave. And so that next morning, after a bit of breakfast, Stalker thought that he'd show me around the village. It was basically a propaganda tour, with him showing me how good life there could be. But I was having none of it. And I brought up all the good things about life back home as much as possible. And just like the night before, I could see that I was getting to him. And then after lunch, Stalker said that there was something that he had to go and do. And I told him to go do his thing, and I'd just wait there where I was. And I thought that I'd use the opportunity to catch up on sleep, but no sooner had I kicked my boots off, but his new girlfriend, someone named Layla, came in asking for a chat. Now, I was nervous right away because you could tell that she wasn't happy with me. And then when I said yes to her question if I planned to take Stalker home or not, she went mental. She said that I was trying to ruin his life, break them up, and bring bad energy into the village. And I told her I was doing nothing of the sort, but this Layla was having none of it. She told me to leave and never come back, but then when I refused, she pulled out some large folding knife. I think it was more an involuntary, nervous kind of laughter, but it just blurted out as I asked her, "What, you gonna stab me? In the Peace Village?" And I didn't think she was serious. I just thought that she was some mental bird who wanted to scare me a little bit. And so when she proper lunged for me and actually tried to stab me, I couldn't believe it. I started screaming, Whoa, what are you doing?" at the top of my lungs, knowing that my best chance of getting her away from me was alerting other people. And the little stone house was just that, little, so it wasn't long until I was completely cornered and had no choice but to defend myself. I really didn't want to do what I did. So please don't get the impression that I took any pleasure from this whatsoever. But I hit her. And the impact sent her reeling with a trickle of blood leaking from her nose, just as Stalker and a few others came running into the house. Layla started screaming bloody murder about how I just hit her out of nowhere, which prompted them to basically frog march me out of the house and towards a kind of makeshift holding cell. Stalker was there, but he wasn't one of the lads who dragged me off. He looked distraught when I admitted to hitting her, and even more so when I kept saying stuff, "Mate, I swear to God she tried to stab me," as I was being dragged off. I don't think I'd know what to do either, so I didn't hold a grudge about him just standing there and doing nothing. But at the time, being barricaded in that little shed with an actual armed mob outside and having Stalker doing nothing about it, I was furious. But I was only angry for a short while because after a visit from someone whose face I couldn't see, all I could feel was fear. I couldn't see his face because he was standing on the other side of the shed door while talking to me, but I was told that I'd be publicly punished for punching Stalker's girlfriend. And my first thought was, how? So that's what I asked. But all I heard from the other side of the shed door was the sound of footsteps getting quieter and quieter until they were gone. Now, I'm not ashamed to say that I've never been so terrified in all my life, like I honestly thought that they were going to kill me. I couldn't shake the image of that man being shot on his knees and how happy everyone seemed when it happened. I was convinced that that was going to happen to me, would try and escape, and the armed guard outside the shed would almost certainly shoot me. And so I stayed put, and told myself to wait for a better opportunity. Once it was fully dark, I remember hearing someone walking up to the guard outside the shed and then recognizing Stalker's voice when they spoke. I was relieved at first. I thought they were going to let me go, but when I saw Stalker standing there with that handgun in his grip after he opened the door, my heart dropped. And when I asked him what the gun was for, he didn't answer my question. He just told me to get up and come out of the shed. And when I did, Stalker pointed towards the jungle and told me to get walking. I asked why he had the gun with him, over and over actually, but he didn't say a word, and then it hit me. They were going to shoot me, and it was Stalker that had volunteered to do it. I begged him not to. I brought up all the times we'd shared, how his mom missed him, but all he said was, "Shut up and walk, Owen," anytime I tried to get him to see reason. And he marched me away out into the jungle, with me begging and pleading the whole way until he finally told me to stop where I was. When I did, Stalker told me to turn around, but he didn't have the gun pointed at me like I was expecting. Instead, he just said, "Hit me." When Stalker said it a second time, it didn't make any more sense than the first. But then when he added, "It has to look real," I suddenly realized what his plan was. I started asking where, and he told me to just get it over with. And so, I hit him. I tried to aim for his lips, and it worked a little bit too well because the second after he was knocked back, he sped out some blood, and I told him I was sorry. But Stalker just shook his head, and as he spat again with a raised hand as if to say, "It's okay, I asked for it." He then told me that once I was a safe distance away, he'd fire off 3 shots into the air, shots he'd claim were aimed at me after I punched him and ran off. But then after that, it was up to me to get myself to the next village, which would take all night. He gave me a torch and compass and told me to keep going north no matter what, and then wish me luck. The last thing he did was make me promise him something. Then I turned and ran. I remember hearing the gun going off behind me, and it was such a messed up situation that I was actually glad to hear it. I knew that it meant that I had to get moving. But the shots might also scare away any animals in the area, animals that might have otherwise have made me a midnight snack. Making it to the village didn't take all night either. but I did hear shouting from behind me at one point where a peace town had sent out search parties probably looking for me. Thankfully, Stalker had given me so much of a head start that they didn't catch up, not even with me at walking pace. But the thought of what they'd do if they caught me was still terrifying. And when I made it to the next village, I knocked on the first door I found. Anywhere else, you might expect people to tell you to F off if you woke them up in the middle of the night. But the Thai family whose house it was were stereotypically understanding and friendly, and helped me get back to Nai Soi in the morning, which was the village I started in where I met up with Prem. And when I turned up at his house, he couldn't believe I was alive, and we were so relieved to see each other that we actually hugged. After that, it was a case of going back the way I'd come, via the 13-hour bus ride back to Bangkok. The most difficult part of all happened after I flew back to the UK, because I had to meet with Stalker's mum and fulfill the promise I'd made him. And that involved lying to her and telling her he was dead. He told me he couldn't leave, that people would get hurt if he tried, and that he couldn't let that happen. He also said he was too far gone to come home, that he'd never adjust, and it'd all be one big disaster if he tried. So, all that considered, it was better that his mom and sister believe that he was dead. But I didn't agree, and although I promised him that I'd convince them he was, I couldn't bring myself to do it. I tried, don't get me wrong, but I broke down just a few words in and had to tell them the truth. I said I'd failed, and that I'd probably spend the rest of my life regretting that failure. They'd trust me to get the job done, to bring their son and brother home, and I'd been too stupid and weak to be able to manage it. And we all cried together while they tried reassuring me that I'd done my best, and they were grateful that I'd even tried. But that didn't seem to do anything for that sense of personal failure that I felt, and the feeling that if I'd done things differently, Stalker would have been right there sitting next to us. And not 10,000 miles away in a place that was intended to be heaven, but turned out to be hell. Many years ago, at the dawn of the 1990s, I had a best friend called Gina, and we were practically inseparable. So much so that it became a running joke, and certain people would refer to us collectively as Genifer, as in Jenny plus Gina equals Genifer, and we thought that we'd be attached to the hip till the time that we were old and gray. And then one day, completely out of the blue, Gina declared that she was moving to Nevada. But I guess I shouldn't have been totally surprised, and here's why. About a month before she announced the move, Gina's grandma passed away and left her a bunch of money. And since her estate was being divided among all of Gina's siblings and cousins, I was expecting it to be a couple of $1,000s at most. But when I asked exactly how much she'd received, Gina said it was a life-changing amount, and that technically, she'd never have to work again. It turns out Gina's Mima was kind of an investment guru, or rather, she hired someone who was, and gave her a whole bunch of her pension money to invest with. This person turned out to be very good at the job, meaning that by the time she died, Mima was worth literally tens of millions of dollars. I know money is no replacement for losing someone you love, but having known someone who's passed away when he's pretty young, getting a chunk of change to solve your money problems sure does soften the blow a little. Not entirely, but it does. But that was not the case with Gina, because rather than begin some new and exciting chapter in her life, Gina's grandma passing away triggered the most deep-seated death anxiety in her. Gina started to reevaluate everything that wasn't a relationship with her nearest and dearest, and she realized that she kind of hated living in California. She realized that she hated her job, and she realized that she wanted way more out of life. And then after a period of self-reflection, she dropped the news about Nevada. I figured since she had all that money, she picked out a nice place to live. Not a mansion or anything, that wasn't Gina's style, but at the minimum, I expected her to at least buy a house. Only she didn't. And where she showed me where she was moving to, I was stunned. Because Gina wasn't moving into a house. She was moving into a trailer park in the desert. that was so run down it was mostly abandoned. And she asked me to go check the place out with her, just to make sure that it was livable. And that term could only be applied very loosely, but it was enough for me to make a decision there and then. She was moving, and the trailer park would be her new home. My boyfriend and I helped her move, and then we went to visit her around 3 weeks later to see how she was doing, and what we saw amazed us. Gina had gone from living a pretty basic life to living almost completely off the grid. She had no phone line, no running water, and the only electricity she got came from a generator that she kept topped with propane. But make no mistake here, while it might sound like she was having a self-imposed poverty, her step up was surprisingly comfortable. And by the time we visited, she had her trailer beautifully decorated both inside and out. She had a TV with a satellite that picked up some local stations, and she had a small greenhouse set up so she could grow vegetables. And on top of her trailer, pointed up towards the sky, was a telescope. Now, I'd gone from super skeptical to completely understanding her vision for moving out there. It was quiet and peaceful, and the scenery was actually very pretty considering it was the desert. And the only catch seemed to be the terms of the lease, or rather, the lack thereof. Gina said that she had paid her landlord $10 a month, and she was pretty sure it was off the books, too. I remember being pretty concerned about that because if something went wrong, the landlord had no obligation to do anything about it. But Gina didn't care. She wanted that kind of independence, and she didn't want to have to rely on anyone but herself. And at first, I thought it was cool as hell. My best friend was living out this newfound dream of hers, and she was making it happen not just on the back of all that money she got, but because she was working her ass off to make it work. I was proud of her, really proud. But then things started to go wrong. One day I got a call from Gina's sister saying that she was kind of worried about her. I thought maybe something had gone wrong with the trailer or with that sketchy landlord, but her sister said it was more like a psychological problem. And it was one that I'd already spotted a sign of without ever even realizing it. And before the move, Gina had been interested in a lot of things, but astronomy was not one of them. So when I saw that telescope on top of her trailer and asked why the new hobby, she said something about how the night sky was so clear, so she figured it'd be a cool addition. And she was right too, and I can only imagine how beautiful the stars looked through that thing on a clear desert night. But the thing about that was, Gina hadn't told me the whole truth, and she totally masked the reasons for her moving out to the desert. But the next time I visited, it was well and truly a mask-off type moment. Between the last time I visited Gina and this time, I'd gone through my first pregnancy and given birth to my daughter. And that meant by the time her sister called, I hadn't seen Gina for almost 8 months, and I drove out to give her the news that I was pregnant. I was also very worried during the more recent drive out to see her, and all on account of what her sister had said during that phone call. She said Gina had been saying some pretty wild things, and not a lot of it made a whole lot of sense. She didn't say much more than that, but it was worrying enough on its own, so I drove out to see her the very next day. Gina was outside when I rolled into the trailer park, tending to some of the vegetables that she was growing in that little greenhouse of hers. And when she saw me coming, she ran to my car and gave me a big hug when I got out. And she asked about my daughter, what it was like being a mom, and at first, everything seemed totally normal. Her trailer and the space around it was looking better than ever, with that telescope still sitting on top. And I asked her how she was, and she told me, great. She didn't say anything weird or crazy sounding, only that the dry desert air had been pretty rough on her skin, and that she was going to make whoever made her moisturizer a very rich person, which sounded remarkably level-headed for someone who was supposedly having a mental breakdown. But then we walked into her trailer and my jaw just about hit the floor. Almost every visible surface, both horizontal and vertical, was covered in posters, paintings, and little knickknacks, and every single one of them had a running theme: aliens. There were framed photos of so-called UFO sightings, some of which had the dates and times engraved into little metal labels attached to the frames. And she had corny little green alien knickknacks all over the place too, most of which that she had picked up from some dusty tourist traps that surrounded Area 51. A bunch of little UFO models were hanging from the ceiling, and there were little green men plushies on every corner of her built-in couch, and her bookshelf had swelled with at least 24 books of extraterrestrial visitations, encounters, and abductions. Now I'm saying, Gina, is there anything you'd like to tell me regarding your choice of decor? And she just sighed and says, my sister called you, didn't she? And I admitted she had, but then asked Gina for an admission of her own. Something was going on with her, and I wanted to hear it from the horse's mouth. And over the next hour or so, Gina explained her newfound obsession, but on the surface, there wasn't anything to be all that alarmed about. Having her grandma pass and receiving all that inheritance money had obviously had her questioning what she wanted out of life. And it was during that kind of quarter-life crisis that she started wondering if the truth really was out there. She started doing a little research on UFO phenomena, and then a little turned into a lot, before a lot turned into an all-day, everyday. She found all aspects of the subject fascinating, which on the surface seemed totally harmless. But as I came to find out, it wasn't just a casual interest. In so many words, and I listened to all this in total horror, Gina had thought long and hard about her purpose in the world, as well as who she was, and had decided that she didn't belong on Earth. And now, out of context, this might have even been more frightening than the reality. But she didn't mean it in a sort of self-destructive way. Not entirely, anyway. And so Gina had come to believe that her origins lay on some other planet, one that wasn't even in our solar system. She subscribed to that sort of aliens are walking among us kind of belief system, but not in the sense that they're all walking around in skin suits pretending to be human. It was more like certain people had extraterrestrial souls planted into them, and she was one of them. And that wasn't all either. Gina had been tracking North American UFO sightings for quite some time, and claimed to have noticed a dramatic increase in recent sightings. She also claimed to have noticed increased activity around Area 51, which she monitored frequently, which had brought her to the deeply shocking conclusion that she was due to return home. I remember listening in silence while she ranted on and on about how they were going to pick her up and take her home, and how she'd finally be in a place that she'd always belonged. It was like a roller coaster of emotion. I was scared, upset, mad at the people she'd been talking to who'd been filling her head with all this nonsense about Greys and Anunnaki. I didn't know whether to laugh, cry, or yell at her. But all I could do was listen with increasing horror as she eventually revealed that she was due to return home very soon, maybe even that night. Gina was so confident that she was going to be visited by aliens, and that she invited me to stay at her place that night so I could witness it for myself. And apparently, even if they didn't come to pick her up, UFOs had been doing flybys of her trailer, so I'd most definitely see one of those if I'd stay up late enough with her. And using the phone belonging to Gina's landlord, I called my boyfriend to let him know what was going on and how I was staying with Gina for the night to monitor her. He asked if I wanted him to join us, but I said no. I wanted to make it look like a sleepover and not the intervention that it actually was. And then it was back to the trailer to keep Gina as centered as possible. And by that I mean talking to her about all things earthly as opposed to celestial. I talked about high school, about movies, and about stuff going on back in California where she used to live. And the last thing I wanted was to talk about aliens because I didn't quite know how I was going to confront her on it yet. I thought that I was doing a good job too because she seemed content not to talk about it as the night went on. But then all of a sudden, she just looked at her watch and says, "All right, it's time." Gina asked if I wanted to join her to go spotting, as she called it, which involved a short walk out to a bluff overlooking a valley. And I stayed very neutral when I said sure, and figured when nothing happened, that would be my time to intervene and talk her out of everything. And it made for a very beautiful walk, and the night sky out there in the desert was absolutely mind-blowing. And then to my surprise, once we got to where we were going, we started to see these little lights flashing on the distant horizon. Gina said the area of the sky that we were looking at was directly over Area 51, and that the government used their own reverse-engineered UFO technology to signal and communicate with these aliens. I suggested that they were more likely to be test flights and stuff because I heard that's what they do out there. But when I said that, Gina gave me this irritated look and then loudly said something like, "No, Jenny, I know what I'm talking about, so don't patronize me like that." And the sudden outburst scared me terribly. Gina hadn't snapped at me like that since our college days and when we had the biggest fight of our whole friendship. But then it made sense because it was over something very real and something important. But that time, it frightened me because it was over some damned flying saucers. I also couldn't reassure myself by witnessing Gina doing any drugs or drinking because all night, she stayed as sober as a judge. The UFOs weren't coming out a bottle, they were just all in her head. I didn't push though. I just simply said that I'd heard they were test flights, and I'm no expert. Gina calmed down a little and then kept on talking through her thought process. She brought along some boombox from her trailer, which I assumed was for listening to music while we were searching for these UFOs. But after she made her big speech about how she was successfully signaling the aliens herself, she turned to the boombox and pressed play. As all these weird beeps and boops started coming from the speakers, Gina turned towards the distant lights and started kind of dancing. That's what it looked like anyway, but I guess she was making symbols with her arms and sometimes legs that the aliens could understand. And the beeps and boops were all kinds of out of rhythm and in different pitches too. There was no music to it at all. It was more like a code Gina had thought would get the aliens' attention. And I was too stunned to say anything at first, but what surprised me even more was how as Gina was doing her weird little dance, the distant lights started getting bigger as whatever was out there got closer. I couldn't hear any engines or anything, and I know that you can hear plane engines from like a mile away, but aside from those weird beeps, there was almost total silence, nothing but crickets. It was kind of eerie, but I still figured that we were just looking at some probably Air Force test flights. So as Gina got more and more worked up and her dancing moves got faster and more gyrating, I took my chance to intervene. I started telling her, "Gina, I don't think they're UFOs. I think you're all worked up and something and it's just manifesting as this interest in aliens." Gina completely ignored me, throwing out her limbs and making them rigid and then alternating between the two. I'd swear the lights got just a little bit bigger when she did that. It could have been a trick of the light, but if it was, Gina saw it too. And she was like, "You see? It's working." And she sounded all out of breath, but then no sooner did she talk, the light started to fade and then blinked out completely. And there was this brief silence as Gina stopped dancing, and then she started off towards the horizon as the tape playing the weird beeps finally came to an end. Gina didn't turn to look at me. She didn't even move at first, but I could see how tensed up she was, like every little muscle was stretched to breaking out. And then she exploded. She ran straight for me after she turned, screaming,
"You messed it up! They were coming for me, and you messed it up, you bitch!"
And I'm saying, "No, wait!" But it didn't do a damn thing. I only backed up a couple of steps before she slammed into me, and then we both hit the dirt. The impact completely knocked the wind out of me, so I could barely breathe anyways. But then the next thing I know, Gina has her hands wrapped around my throat, and it felt like she was squeezing as hard as she could. She kept on screaming at me, saying that I'd ruined everything, that she was going to kill me. I tried to get a grip on one of her wrists, but she pulled it away, and then punched me so hard in the face it made my vision flash white for a second when I closed my eyes. I tried to raise my head, but she punched me again and I tasted blood in my mouth. I think if it was anyone else, a man for example, I would have been in some real trouble. But once I started to really fight back, I was able to get her off of me, I'd always been the taller and more athletic of the two of us, and although it was by no means easy, it wasn't long before I had Gina overpowered. And after that, it was my turn to yell, for her to calm the heck down before I started hitting her back. She struggled a lot, and she even started trying to bite me at one point, but then once she started to tire out, she actually started talking, and then when she started talking, I was able to calm her down by asking her what the hell had gotten into her. And that is when Gina broke down. I won't bore you with all the little details of what came after, but let's just say that Gina doesn't live in the trailer park anymore. She lives somewhere a little closer to home and lives a pretty regular life considering her circumstances. I guess the weirdest aspect of the whole thing for me personally is how Gina is still into UFOs and other such alien phenomena, but she now enjoys it in a very healthy kind of humorous way and doesn't let it take over her life. And what she went through, her obsession and delusions, were a manifestation of some much more deep-seated problem, one that started when she began to believe that her life had no purpose. It was compounded by grief that she felt as having lost her grandma, too, something she realized that she wasn't over it till after the big fight we had. And she volunteers with animals now, and we still hang out from time to time whenever each of us is free. Gina sometimes apologizes for attacking me that night after she lost her mind, but I tell her it's all water under the bridge. Besides, it'd take a lot more than just some fisticuffs in the desert to ruin a friendship as perfect as ours. So a long time ago, when I was a much younger man, I used to ride a motorcycle around the country while living as something of a nomad. I could write a whole book on the reasons why I chose to live like that, so I'll just skip over all that in favor of telling perhaps the creepiest, most frightening story from all of my combined travels. I used to stop at all kinds of places. Hotels, motels, holiday inns, as they say. But sometimes I didn't get lucky enough to find a soft mattress or a locked door, and I had to either beg, borrow, or steal a place to sleep. One time in Wyoming, I drove for miles and miles through the night and didn't see so much as a gas station for hours on end. And then finally, I rolled into this little one-horse town which had a bar that looked like it was still open. A reliable way of finding a couch to sleep on could be to buy a barfly a couple of beers and then offer to drive him back home in exchange for a place to rest. This was generally pretty safe, as 99% of the time they'd passed out upon contact with any soft surface, and I actually got to take a shower and help myself to whatever was in the fridge before getting a few hours of shut-eye. Now, I wasn't stealing. I'd always ask if I could make myself at home, and for the most part, no one ever meant me any harm. But there's always that one little exception that proves the rule. And so I was rolling through the middle of nowhere when I saw that bar that I mentioned, and I figured it's my one solid option for finding a place to sleep. I park my bike outside and head through the doors, and right away I can see my candidate leaning up against the bar, and he's this big, tubby guy, like a red-headed Santa Claus, and he's sharing a hearty laugh with the bartender who's referring to him by name. I sat a few bar stools down from him, ordered a beer, and then a few minutes later, and since he hadn't seen me around before, he got to asking where I was from. I told him my story, bought him a beer when he ran dry, and then before long, we were talking like old friends. We swapped stories, talked sports, and then eventually the bartender very lovingly told us both to get lost. And he told me his wife was at his sister's, so he didn't even have to ask permission for some hairy biker to sleep in the guest room. And since I'd only had a couple of beers, I gave red-headed Santa, who told me his name was Ron, a ride home on my bike. We went inside, had a couple of more beers, and then after showing me to the guest bedroom, Ron bid me a good night. I should have been out by the moment my head hit the pillow, but there was something Ron said just before we called it a night that kept on sort of replaying in my mind. He asked a few more questions regarding what I was doing, and maybe it was the beer having loosened up my tongue, but I told him how being a Rolling Stone meant that I had many contacts, but no constants in my life. And what I meant by that could perfectly be summed up in one of the questions Ron asked before we retired. We were talking, and he's posing all sorts of questions here and there when he suddenly asked me, "So, say something happened to you. You're telling me there's no one that'd come looking for you?" And it was a point of pride for me at one point, being truly independent and living off the grid, as they say. It was just me, my bike, and the road ahead of me. But there was some downsides to that too. Downsides I didn't completely explore with Ron that evening, but he sure as hell seemed to pick up on them with that question of his. And the way he looked at me before we called it made me think that it wasn't entirely one of those more casual questions. I guess it was an additional effect of all those beers. That and my absolute lack of alcohol tolerance, which had that warning feeling creeping up on me so slowly. But as I lay there, I realized that I was better getting back on the road than just laying there trying to sleep. And I wasn't great at trusting regular people anyways. Sometimes I prefer to sleep outside than pass out in front of some sketchy strangers. So when the feeling hit, I rolled out of bed and quietly started to get dressed. I put on my shirt and pants, and then I was working on putting my boots on. And then I heard a noise coming from outside in the hallway. Any other time, I'd have figured that it was just the homeowner going to drain the main vein, so to speak, and it wouldn't have spooked me in the least bit. But that time, hearing that creaking floorboard had me freezing solid with my bootlaces mid-tie. I didn't move. I didn't speak. All I knew is that there was someone outside the bedroom door, and they weren't moving. I didn't know if it was Ron, someone who'd broken in, or Ron's wife having come home early from her sister's. And so there was a good few seconds where I didn't know what the hell I should do. But when I tied my boots and got onto my feet, Ron decided for me. He was covered in overalls and some kind of mask when he burst into the room. But I could tell just from the shape that it was him. He came barreling towards me with some kind of mallet in his hands, but thanks to the amount that he had to drink, his swings were powerful, but very inaccurate. I ducked one way, dodged the next, and then slipped behind him to try and wrap an arm around his neck. I did enough hand-to-hand training in the Corps to get that done no problem, but what I wasn't expecting was Ron to simply fall back on his ass and crush me half to death in the process. It didn't just knock the wind out of me, it damn near broke my spine as 300 pounds of muscle and beer gut slammed me against the hardwood. I had to make sure that I wasn't broken in half before I tried getting up, but by the time I tried, it was already too late. Ron didn't get up. He just kind of rolled over so he was still on top of me, and then I'm still not sure why he tried this, but his choice of finisher was trying to stuff his fingers into my mouth, I guess to try and suffocate me. Here's where I figured the booze had impaired his reasoning skills a little too much, because I could still breathe, and it gave me the chance to just bite down those fingers of his as hard as I could. And when I sank my teeth into his flesh, Ron let out a scream so loud that I thought it had burst my eardrums. He then pulled his fingers out of my mouth so hard that it threw him off balance a little, just enough for me to roll out from under him while he nursed his bleeding fingers. And upon seeing me get up, he tried to do the same, but being unable to put any weight on that hand I bit, I was able to get the jump on him. I sent the toe of my boot into his chin, knocking the mask off of his face, but my first kick failed to knock him out. The second, though, this one did the job, and after another almighty swing of my boot, Ron was out cold and snoring. I remember watching some blood bubble at his nostrils as I put my clothes on as fast as I could. I was terrified that he'd wake up and we'd have to dance that same dance all over again. But once I was dressed, I ran for my bike. Now I could have robbed the guy. Hell, I could have killed him. But all I wanted to do was get as far away as possible, because it's not just in the movies that cops don't like drifters. Hey friends, thanks for listening. Click that notification bell to be alerted of all future narrations. I release new videos every Monday and Thursday at 9 p.m. Eastern Time, and there are super fun live streams every Sunday and Wednesday night. And if you got a story, be sure to submit them over at my email, letsreadsubmissions@gmail.com, and you might even hear your story featured on the next video. And if you want to support me even more, grab early access to all future narrations and bonus content over on Patreon, or click that big join button to hear about the extra perks for members of the channel. And check out the Let's Read podcast, where you can hear all of these stories and big compilations located anywhere you listen to podcasts. I also have a true crime channel called Saturn Soul. All links are down in the description below. Thanks so much, friends. And remember, Austin Reeves is the greatest.